Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the joint workshop on the scenario 2024 close and kickoff on the 2026 TYNDP scenario cycle held by ENTSO-E and ENTSO-E. I'm Roberto Francia, working in the SPC business area of ENTSO-E, and I'm introducing today's workshop. Disclaimer to begin with, this is a public event, so we are going to record the whole meeting, and we are going to take pictures for later use in our social media accounts.
I think you're muted. No, you muted the... Wait, 1 second.
Okay, I hope everybody can hear me, certainly here in the room. So I repeat for those who are connected online, we welcome everybody to the joint workshop ENTSO-E ENTSO on the scenarios, TYNDP scenarios 2024 and 2026. Disclaimer at the beginning, we're going to record the meeting and we're going to take pictures for our social media. You can have a link here to the whole package of the 2024 draft scenario report. We not only will find the PDF documentation, but also charts that you can navigate yourself through the website. For those who are participating in person today, we have distributed a copy of the report each. This is going to be a workshop that is taking almost the whole day. We start now and we will end around 3 p.m. We have a morning session and an afternoon session. The morning session will be both available in person and online. The afternoon session will start with also online and in-person presence, but it will close with a fishbowl setting that will only be available for people here in Brussels, so it will not be possible to participate online. In the morning, we will have high-level messages on the scenarios provided by our directors, Thilo von der Grün and Alan Kroos. Then we will have the European Commission presenting its own views on the TYNDP 2024 scenario cycle and the expectations for the 2026 scenario cycle. The Commission will be followed by the ACER, also providing the same views from the ACER point of view. We will have Christy Rates, who is connecting. She was not able to be here in person today. And then we have also advice on the 2024 scenarios provided by the European Scientific Advisory Board on Climate Change. And then we will have one of the two co-conveners of the SRG, stakeholder reference group, providing information on how the collaboration on the scenario cycle has been going on so far and their expectations on the 2026 scenarios. The morning session will go on with the presentation of the scenarios by our experts, Alexander, Nalan, Laura, and Dante, that will be presenting the strategy and targets alignment, first of all, and then also the modeling methodologies. This will be followed by a Q&A session. I will show you later the link, the Slido link, which allows everybody to ask questions during this part of the workshop. And after the coffee break, we will have a presentation on the demand and supply figures of the 2025-24 TYNDP scenarios, also followed by a Q&A. After that, we have a presentation of the 2026 scenario cycle and the next steps, followed by a Q&A session. And finally, something that is brand new to this year's workshop, that is the presentation on the role of NOH, so the European network of hydrogen operators, provided by one of the persons who has been most involved in this. It's very relevant because the package that was just adopted by the European Union institutions provides for a new association that is similar to ENTSO-E and ENTSO-G that will be dedicated entirely to hydrogen matters. And finally, we will have closing remarks for the morning session from Alan Cross from ENTSO-E. After lunch, we will restart on an introduction on economic variance from our experts, together with the ACER and the SRG co-convener. And then we will have the fishbowl session that I was referring to earlier, and finally the concluding remarks by Thilo van der Grom from ENTSO-G. Here is the link to the Slido poll online, which you can connect to. It's very easy. You have to scan this code. You enter manually a code that you find here. It's 2733380. You need to enter your name and surname. The system does not allow to ask questions without showing the name of the person. You will start the questions you may like to ask, and then you also have the possibility to select, to like the questions from other participants you like the most. This will allow us to have a ranking of questions. It will make certainly our work easier to select the most relevant questions. Thank you very much. I will now leave the floor to Alan and Thilo to present the high-level messages of the 2024 TYNDP scenarios. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And also from my side, a warm welcome for the ones here in Brussels, taking the opportunity to come here in person, but also, of course, of all the interested ones online. It's, let's say, my pleasure, but also being able to be proud of what we have been able to deliver in, let's say, a journey that we started 2 years ago. And that has been, let's say, finalized now with a report that you have either physically in your hands or, let's say, digitally on the website. And I think what we should, let's say, look at, we're trying to, let's say, with the scenario report, start the process to make sure that we have a view how we can look at our infrastructure developments, that we can, in the next steps, identify the gaps, the needs, and how to look at building the right infrastructure for Europe going into, let's say, a decarbonized system. So from our perspective, we aim each time again to deliver a fit-for-purpose infrastructure view for a net zero energy system. As the ACER framework guidelines also stipulates, and the European Commission in the TEN-E regulation, these scenarios are built in line with the policy targets. And during 2 years, you can imagine that, let's say, data is developing and picking up. So we have, let's say, been using as far as possible the latest available data. But you can imagine we also need cutoff dates. Okay, from this on, we need to further progress and proceed. So let's say this is, let's say, part of the process picking up. But yeah, working on that, taking that on. The way we have been picking it up in the scenarios always trying to give different views of what could happen, what might happen, and where should we be, let's say, prepared for. And this has followed more or less the same approach as the last cycle, looking at 2 views to collect and to pick up. One is, let's say, based upon as much as possible the NECPs, while we know that the NECPs have been finalized just now. But we took already what was available, what was being discussed, what was being picked up, and that's what we call the national trends. The national trends as such should be also made, let's say, target compliant, because that's on the other side, our obligation as ENTSO-E and ENTSO-G to deliver scenarios that are only target compliant. So that's why we said, okay, we have a central scenario, NT+. So we needed to amend a bit the figures in, let's say, the data collected from the member states picking up. The amendments were, let's say, not drastic as such. So that's why it's still reflecting member states' policies in quite a good way. Looking at indeed their view on ramping up the renewables, but also the phase out of fossil fuel, but also based on the NECPs, which were on their side again based on the Commission's, let's say, targets. The other part that we have been looking at is, okay, looking at our storylines, how could, let's say, our energy world develop going forward? And we continued building upon, let's say, the storylines that were already introduced last time, in the last cycle. A distributed energy storyline and a global ambition storyline. These have been consulted and looked at, picking up and showing, let's say, differentiating views from our perspective. Details on that will be handled by the team. So this is, let's say, trying to give a wider perspective, a broader perspective, to make sure that the plans we have for our infrastructure are robust and future-proof. So looking at, let's say, all this has not been done only by ourselves. This has been prepared and organized by ENTSO-E and ENTSO-G, but we have tried also to improve our transparency on that one, but also our stakeholder engagement and picking up. And especially since last cycle, we have been able to now get a stakeholder involvement also with the input parameters, because that's where, let's say, we have also recognized earlier already, but we were able now to organize it. With the input, you define also the output, of course. And I think we succeeded quite a lot in taking, let's say, steps there. Doesn't mean that we're already there. We can always improve. We're also happy to hear your feedback and looking how we can continue and go on. We have also, of course, seen, let's say, already first publications, and we'll hear, let's say, more views today. But we do feel that with the stakeholder engagement we have taken choices going forward, maybe not the most perfect one, but at least an aligned one. And we do feel that we have created scenarios which are fit for purpose to develop and continue our infrastructure planning going forward. So from that perspective, I'm also very proud on what the team has been able to do. So also from this perspective to the team members, my sincerest congratulations to all the work done, because they have been doing much more than myself. And I would also like to hand over to my fellow convener, let's say, from the steering group, with, let's say, as you can see on the slide, we think the 2024 scenarios are a sound basis to develop the infrastructure fit for purpose for a net zero energy system with current available knowledge. So, Thilo.
Thanks a lot, Alan. And the second slide now of the high-level messages is indeed then about the extensive stakeholder engagement. And as you already mentioned, Alan, this time we followed the philosophy that it's more valuable for the outputs of the results if you have a deep dive with the stakeholders into the input parameters that we did by via public consultation middle of last year. We had then also stakeholder roundtables during the event, where on a variety of topics we really could go into details with the stakeholders that could bring their expertise. On our ENTSO scenario website, you really find a lot of information to download, so including all input we received during the public consultation, as well as a report that details how it was considered. And then a new step forward for stakeholder engagement is also the stakeholder reference group that was established. And from our side, as ENTSOs, we can say we're very happy about the partnership that is already now working well for the TYNDP 2024 scenarios, but obviously will have an even bigger impact on the following scenarios as the stakeholder reference group will then be involved from the beginning on. And I think there I don't need to go more into detail, because the stakeholder reference group, in the sense of an extensive stakeholder engagement, will also have a presentation later. Yeah, and then I already mentioned the website we have, and there's a lot to download. You can really look into hourly simulation results if you want. So there's a lot to look into, and we invite you to do so. And then I would hand over back to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Thilo and Alan. So now we give the floor to the European Commission, Maciej Greckitz, presenting the views of the Commission on the 2024 scenario cycle and the expectations for the 2026. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. Maybe I will not present the views of the Commission, because it takes time when the Commission adopts its official views. So I'll just give preliminary feedback on TYNDP 2024, because we've been involved in the process, and the final views probably would not be a surprise. These are going to be based on our work and feedback that has been provided throughout the process and now, and also what are the expectations for the 2026 cycle. Next slide, please. I will start with the explanations. Why are we here, and why are we meddling in the process, and what is our role in the scenarios? Because there are different deliverables that are prescribed in the legislation, and scenarios is one step, first step for all the work that is ongoing in the TYNDP scenario. But importantly, this is a basis for the PCI process, because they fit into the cost-benefit analysis. And this is also the basis for our process when we assess the PCI and PMI projects and establish our own list. So this is the key step, both for the TYNDP, but also for the PCI process. And we are obliged to use it, and there are some specific requirements for the scenarios. Next slide, please. So the TEN-E gives a framework. What is the role of different actors, in particular ACER and the Commission in the process. So for different deliverables, we have different role. For scenarios, the revised TEN-E established the requirement for the framework guidelines. These are now set. They were adopted in January 2023, but they were not fully implemented or followed for this process because of the timing. So we take into account, even if we would expect a bit stronger follow-up of the guidelines. The next step is for ACER and member states to give its opinion. They received now the final or draft scenarios and UNDP for their views. And only now we'll have the official role for the approval of the scenarios based on our views. And if there is something that we would like to amend, and we could request the amendments of the scenarios, this would be followed by the reasoned opinion, and then we will set our official views. Then on different processes, infrastructure gap identification, we also can issue an opinion, and the same for cost-benefit analysis methodology that was already approved. We have the official role of giving the approval. For the final deliverable, there is also only the opinion of ACER. Next slide, please. So the basis for what we check in the development of the scenarios is given in the Article 12 of the TEN-E. So basically, the framework guidelines are the key framework for what is expected from the scenarios. So we don't really set specific requirements as such how the scenarios should be developed or look like. This was more defined by ACER, and ACER will verify the compliance with the guidelines. There are some key points, though, that are mentioned explicitly, like stakeholder involvement on key elements, especially assumptions and how they are incorporated. And we have just seen in the previous slides that this has been improved, and there is big involvement, improved transparency in the process, which is very much welcome. This workshop is also the example that actually stakeholders are involved in the process quite well, in our views. A long perspective until 2050 and intermediary steps as appropriate. The scenarios indeed are till 2050. The intermediate steps probably also for the next framework, there could be some additional improvements. For input and output data published in sufficient, clear, and accurate form, again, the visual sheet platform is there. And then what are the views to be, or the inputs on the final deliverable or the draft deliverable? There is the opinion of the scientific board, European Scientific Advisory Board on Climate Change. Also, ACER and member states give their opinion, and the Commission has the right to approval. So these are the points that are explicitly mentioned in the legislation, and that we're gonna follow and try to express our views on. Next slide, please. So the framework guidelines, there is some indication what should be covered in the guidelines. They go beyond, but our colleagues from ACER will explain what is expected and how it was, how the scenarios were compliant or followed the guidelines. It's important that the scenarios are transparent, non-discriminatory, and developed in a robust way. They have to be in line with the energy efficiency first principle, in line with the Union targets for 2030, both for energy and climate, and also with compliant with the 2050 climate neutrality objective. They should also take into account the latest available scenarios and, when relevant, national energy and climate plans. Thank you. Next one. So what is behind, in our views, what those criteria that are set in the guidelines, and indeed there will be mainly verified by ACER. By transparent and non-discriminatory robust scenarios, we mean stakeholder involvement, and indeed there is some. The presence of the stakeholder reference group is something which is very much welcome. The stakeholder reference group was working very well in our view and delivering very important and useful input to the process. Unfortunately, they only joined in the very last stage for this cycle, so there is not much actually that could be done by the group. But we hope that for the next round, there is going to be better cooperation, better involvement, and better follow-up of the recommendations of the stakeholder reference group. Also, the publication of the data, there is still something that we've been struggling. This is the consistency with the Eurostat data. There are different indicators used, unfortunately, by us on the Commission side. When we use our modeling, there are different indicators used by our colleagues in ENTSO-E and ENTSO-G. This is understandable because there are different tools used, there are deliverables of the models, but we still need to have a common denominator if you want to assess them in an easy way, if you want to compare it to the historical data, if it's to be understandable by stakeholder. It's not always enough to publish all the outputs. They have to be really in an understandable way, in a clear way presented, so that really the proper assessment can be done. The timing, because it's, we take it as a part of the robust development, and this has been an issue. We have to admit there have been delays in the process, so the final draft report was submitted end of May, despite the earlier planning for February of this year, and our expectations would be even earlier. Regarding the energy efficiency first principle, primarily for the scenarios, this should be done by the compliance with the energy efficiency targets, and also looking at the demand side resources, how they are incorporated, and there is going to be still a lot of probably work to properly integrate demand side management in a proper way in the scenarios. I think that demand variance, demand developments will be something to be critical for the future, that they are better taken into account also when we talk about the infrastructure planning. Next one, please. For the targets, there are three basic figures for the energy. So there is final energy consumption for 2030, which is a binding target, and this has to be met by all scenarios. In the case of the current round, it's only the national trend scenario that delivers figures for 2030. For the primary energy consumption, there is an indicative target, but this is also to be checked by us to see if there is a compliance. If not, what are the reasons behind? What are the causes for the deviation? Because there can be more justification that those targets are needed, especially when we talk about the levels of hydrogen. For the renewables, again, there is a binding target of at least 42.5% share in the gross final energy consumption. This is the minimum. Preferably, we would aim at 45%. For climate neutrality objective, net zero emissions in 2050. And in this respect, there is going to be a presentation later on of the European Scientific Advisory Board on climate change, because the figures indeed are the final targets seem to be met. There's also always the devil is in the details, so how the calculations were done, what is behind the estimates of the greenhouse gas emissions, and this will also checked looking at the opinion of the board and further analysis. Next slide, please. And then a bit of more clicking for you, Roberto, sorry. So when we talk about the latest available scenarios, there was quite an issue, I think, for the colleagues, because there were, this is a dynamic process both on the ENTSO side and also on the Commission side. So we started with the Fit for 55 scenario that was adopted in February 2022. In the meantime, there was Repower EU scenario in May 2022. Please, one more click. And then the climate target plan for 2040, that was in February 2024. But in the end, the main scenario that we would consider as a benchmark was Fit for 55 scenario, because it follows the current legislation. Repower EU did not set any binding targets. There was some indication on the ambition for hydrogen, but still what we consider as the minimum is Fit for 55. For climate target plan, this was adopted rather late, and it was still not something that was setting the official objectives. It was an impact assessment, setting the preferred targets for 2040 for greenhouse gas emissions. Again, these are not binding targets, not full data set were published to be followed, and they came quite late. So this was not really considered, but as you see in the opinion of the board, there can be still some checks how the scenarios compared to this scenario. For us, Fit for 55 will be the main one. For the national climate target plans, if we go back a bit, the issue is always about the timeliness of data collection. The plans were to be submitted to the Commission in the summer last year, which was already quite late for the process. The issue was also that the draft scenarios not always had the full data set that would be necessary or for the scenario development. Also, the data quality was not always sufficient. So we would have to take into account to what extent this was really could be factored in the scenarios, and we know that it was limited in the current process. So if you go now to the 2026, what we expect, given the delays, it's clear timeline and planning of activities, cutoff date for data collection, long-term planning and clarity, in particular innovations going beyond one cycle. We know that if you want to squeeze everything, there are going to be some adjustments to the scenarios. There is probably limited time for additional things, but we would like to have a continuous idea on what should be done and what is planned to be done in terms of the improvement of the scenarios. Streamlined data collection, we're going to have a 2025 reference scenario to be adopted in the first quarter of 2025. This is the intention planning on our side. These are going to be based on the final NECPs and dedicated data collection. So it will be good that to the extent possible, because it's going to be tight and it might be again too late, that this scenario is factored in the next 2026 cycle scenarios. There's also some work to be done on our side when we collect the data from member states, that we could streamline it, share it with our colleagues in ENTSOs, so that we are sure that we can really have consistency of the data instead of having two different exercises. Timely deliverable, we would still we would aim preferably at the end of 2025. There is another process that is not run by the Commission, but it's run by the energy community when they identify their project of interest. And this is a bit earlier, it happens now, so it's basically in the summer. So if they are to use the scenarios in next cycle, it's important that they are available at the latest early 2026. Otherwise, they would have to stick to the current scenarios, which is, again, suboptimal solution. Stakeholders' involvement, as I said before, we really hope the stakeholder reference group is going to continue their role and their tasks and commitment to the development, and they could really contribute to the process, and their views will be taken into account and followed. Next slide, please. Again, what we want to achieve within the process is that scenarios are fit for purpose. Anti-plus scenario, national trends, is still a bit a standing out scenario from the other two, the distributed energy and global ambition. We would like to see that really a central scenario, fully fledged with full data set, where data gaps are really filled, and this is the scenario that could be really compared with our scenarios and could be used as the main scenarios for the cost-benefit analysis and for our process. Also, coherent variants for the distributed energy and global ambitions. We always consider them as there could be possible features, but they were not really clear to understand what is behind them. There were different factors and drivers used, so the clear storyline was not there in our view. So more understandable rationale behind the parameters deviation would be welcome. There is a proposal for economic variance that we think is quite useful. It was presented in the framework guidelines. So this would mean that these are not fully fledged scenarios, but rather variants of future for stress testing of the main scenario. So this approach would be a bit different, but it's going to be presented later during the day, if I understand correctly. Given that the focus would be on one scenario, the central scenario, it's important that there is scope for flexibility and sensitivities to reflect uncertainties and dynamic environment that we have to cope with. So the policies might change, there might be some different things to be changed. It's important that the process has this flexibility incorporated as something to be considered from the very beginning. Also, robust analysis of the 2035. So now there's interpolation. There are main steps for 2030 and 2040. For the next round, 2035 probably would be more critical. Most of the projects now that we see to be completed are between 2030, 2035. So this time framework would be more important and should be better analyzed. And also 2040, which could be also backed by additional targets on the Commission side, would be a critical time. Scenarios should be used in the subsequent deliverables. It's also a question of resources and timing. Now we always have to choose one scenario that is fully assessed mainly in the needs assessment methodology. So if you have different scenarios, they should be used in all the deliverables in a consistent manner. And the last point, strong cooperation between ENTSO-E and ENTSO-G, and we have a new actor to complicate the things, ENOH. So it's going to be challenging, but we would expect that this goes smoothly and there is transparency and good cooperation on the side of all the actors. Next one. And the last point is application of the framework guidelines that we would like to see to be fully now reflected in the 2026 cycles. Follow-up of the stakeholder reference group recommendations. There can be very useful developments there and recommendations. It's good that there is a follow-up, even if not the 2026 cycle. So as I said, there is a clear planning how this could be taken on board, even in at the later stage. Consideration of the scientific board opinion. This is going to be presented later. So it's good that, again, if there are some methodological things that they are explained and followed up. And presentation of the results. So there is a clear definition of the data and the reference and consistency with the Eurostat, because this is the main, I think, benchmark and reference for various stakeholders to compare and analyze the data when they use it for their purposes. We would also like the aggregates at country level, because we usually look at country level. It could be by bidding zones, but this is not always easily obtainable from the currently published data. So this will be it from my side. I'm coming first. I probably should come last, because then our views will be based on the ACER opinion and the scientific board. But I give you some flavor of what we'll be looking at, what is the initial feedback, and what we expect in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's now up to Christy Louise from ACER. I would ask her to open the mic and share the screen with us. Thank you.
Good morning from Ljubljana. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, perfectly.
Excellent. Let me quickly, can you enable the share mode, please? Thank you.
It's done. All good.
Yeah. So now you should see a big purple screen in front of you. So thanks for having me here. My two colleagues who are the experts on the topic are free this weekend. They have some time off. And when they asked me to prepare this presentation, I thought first, that's cool. I can finally see ENTSO-E again. I used to be an intern with you in 2017. But also I get to think about scenarios which sound very futuristic, but might be closer to our expectations and targets in general. So let's dive quickly into the agenda. My short intervention today will be about what are the ACER TYNDP scenario guidelines and why are they so important to bring us all into one boat? What are ACER's upcoming opinion on the ENTSO-E scenarios and ENTSO-G scenarios? And what does ACER endorse for the 2026 cycle? If you want to delve a little bit into the regulation, I'm referring to the TYNDP regulation under Article 12. And for this presentation, I am putting particular reference into Article 12.1, 2, and 5. So let's go to the first question. What are the ACER TYNDP scenario guidelines? And here I put it a little bit into perspective because throughout the process, ACER is involved in basically two stages. This is a very ACER-centric point of view. The scenarios are, of course, much more important for ENTSO-E and ENTSO-G when it comes to the TYNDP development. But for us, it was very important to develop and publish framework guidelines for joint scenarios in 2023 based on the principles of transparency, robustness, and inclusivity or non-discrimination. Then ENTSO-E and ENTSO-G use ACER's framework guidelines to jointly develop scenarios that are made use of for a sound union-wide network development plan. And in order to make sure that everything is in check, ACER assesses the compliance of these scenarios with the guidelines and sends the results as an opinion to the ENTSOs, but also to member states and the European Commission. So let's quickly recap on what my colleague from the European Commission has already stated. Those are the TYNDP requirements for the framework guidelines. They are there to establish criteria for transparent, non-discriminatory and robust development of joint scenarios, to ensure that the scenarios are in line with the energy efficiency first principle, to take into account the latest available Commission scenarios and national energy and climate plans, and to take into account recommendations from member states, stakeholders, and the European Scientific Advisory Board on climate change. With this, we can answer the second question, why are the TYNDP scenario guidelines so important? The guidelines build a framework that streamlines the development process whose scenarios are used in the union-wide 10-year network development plan. This way, the scenarios comprise a timely preparation, an objective-driven, transparent, and inclusive process that includes stakeholders, but also their scrutiny, which should reach a robust outcome, which is both realistic and explanatory to the audience. The guidelines aim to ensure full compliance with the Union's 2030 targets for energy and climate and its 2050 climate neutrality objective. So this is something that you have already heard in the previous presentation. I'm quickly going to skip this slide as we're going to talk about the economic variance in our afternoon session. Now, what needs to be said is that there is more to come in ACER's opinion on the compliance of ENTSO-E's and ENTSO-G's draft TYNDP 2024 scenarios report with the ACER scenario guidelines in mid-July. So what I can say here is merely a few things that have been mentioned already previously. A more detailed look upon things will be published in just a few weeks from now. But the upcoming opinion basically mentions that, as far as I understood, all technical requirements as stated in the framework guidelines have been ticked off, and the stakeholder reference group has been initiated successfully. However, there are a few orange flags that we would like to stress. This includes some delays in the installment of the framework guidelines and the SOG. I do want to mention, however, that in a challenging 2-year TYNDP timeline and with the installments of both the framework guidelines and the SOG for the very first time, it is absolutely understandable that the road started off a little bit bumpy. The second point might sound a little bit harsh, but these are things that should be kept in mind in general, which when it comes to data collection and analysis, and that is the consistency, the assumptions, being aware of data imperfections and how to handle those, and also the transparency of data availability to, for example, the SRG and benchmarking of information. One third point would be with regards to a new independent body such as the SRG, where we have to make sure that there is a balance between their independence, but also their need for scrutiny of the input, assumptions, and modeling methodologies throughout the process timeline. So what can we endorse for the upcoming cycle? What can we say has happened very well, and where can we improve things? And here I would like to point out just 5 points. There might be a few more. However, as it is already written down in the guidelines, it is very important to write down and execute an exhaustive process timeline and stakeholder engagement plan to make sure that all the steps fit into this very restrictive TYNDP timeline. Second point is, of course, a close collaboration with the stakeholder reference group and other very important associates, such as the advisory board, to take from their input to ensure that external and ENTSO-E predictions resonate with each other. The third point is a national and European target-driven scenario development that includes low and high economic variance. More on this in the afternoon session. An appropriation of all energy carriers to supplement sector integration. And as we are currently still collecting some data or using some data from the 2024 cycle, to use such data collection as long as it's fresh and adapt it into the 2026 scenario development. Last but not least, I would also like to mention that ACER is very proud that the SRG is already actively contributing to the current cycle, but that we are expecting them to also continue their active contribution in the 2026 and future scenario development cycles. They have hit the ground running. We thank them very much for their contribution, and we assume that they will be in our orbit for much longer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christy. So I would now leave the floor to Lena Kitzing from the European Scientific Advisory Board on Climate Change. I can share the screen. I would just invite her to speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for inviting us for this and give our opinion or a short description of our opinion. We've got 5 minutes, so I'll be really fast. If you switch to the slide that I have, that would be great. Thank you. So what we did is, the Scientific Advisory Board on Climate Change was mentioned several times already now, but just as a quick reminder is that we have been established by the European climate law to give independent scientific advice. And we do that in several different areas. We've done it with the 2040 overall carbon budget advice. And we also are part of this TYNDP process here, where we are looking into compliance with climate and energy targets for Europe. And we do this independently, and we are not involved inside the process in any other way. So this is just an objective look at the scenario building process. And what we've done here is that we have assessed the scenarios and the documents that you have published in May. We have benchmarked it against our own scenarios that we have used for our 2040 carbon budget advice, or 2040 target and carbon budget advice, because that was basically the overall opinion or overall range of scenarios that we find feasible as decarbonization pathways. So we have benchmarked it against our view on how Europe can be decarbonized. And then we've also benchmarked it against the European Commission's scenario 3 in the 2040 impact assessment for comparison. And what we found is that the scenarios as they are right now, they are not fully in line with the climate and energy targets that the European Union has set itself, and that in its current form they may lead to an overshoot of the overall greenhouse gas budget in the EU. They might also lead to avoidable climate vulnerability of the energy infrastructure. And we also fear that there might be insufficient pace of fossil fuel phase out and direct electrification in the way the scenarios are built. This might lead to unnecessarily high cost of the energy transition and also high energy import dependency. So when we look into the scenarios a little bit more deeper, we have then recommended to improve the draft scenarios to better align them with climate and energy objectives in a few areas. The first area is regarding the I'll just take the chronological area. So first, regarding the 23 target compliance. We've seen that they have been made compliant through the gap filling methodology. However, we also noticed that the final energy consumption, oil and gas, has actually just been brought down without other areas being brought up. I know this is part of the methodology, but we think that this should be revisited in some way. And also the CCS assumptions seem quite unrealistic and also infeasible when we compare it to our own scenarios in terms of implementation speed of CCS and cost assumptions. Then also we found that the scenarios actually go beyond the benchmark that we've set for the greenhouse gas budget in 2030 to 2050. As we had recommended as feasible pathways for decarbonization, mainly due to some methodological issues in how the emissions are calculated in the scenarios, in the ones where the budget has been shown. For two things. First, they exclude some industrial process emissions that are not linked to direct fuel consumption. I think that's how they were calculated, and some of these emissions have fallen through the crack, for example, for cement and lime production. And this actually affects the overall budget by about 2 gigatons in the area. So that's quite a bit. And then also the volume of carbon capture and storage that was assumed, especially in the global ambition scenario, because it goes above the limits set by the impact assessment scenario. It looks like it appears to include some carbon capture and use, and the use part obviously should not be have counted as negative emissions, so that adds another 1.4 gigatons of CO2 into the budget. So overall we conclude that the carbon budget's actually exceeding the ones that we find in alignment with pathway to carbon neutrality. Then we also had a few methodological issues around hydrogen supply and imports. Already in 2030, we can see a very high hydrogen demand, which is more than double of what we have defined as the upper limit of feasibility in our scenarios. So what can be achieved in terms of implementation of hydrogen production. And also in 2040 to 50, this demand is about 1.5 to 5 times higher than what we found in our benchmarks. And just to give an example, the hydrogen production through electrolysis is expected in that scenario to take up almost a third of the total electricity demand in the scenarios, which is quite quite a substantial amount. And then, of course, also it's not only about the production. The demand is so large that there's also assumed quite a large share of hydrogen import into the European Union, and we fear that if that is not coming to materialize, or not on the price or on the prices that have been assumed in the scenarios, this would then have could jeopardize the achievement of the climate neutrality scenarios even further. And because not enough action has been taking place inside the EU. And then the last point that I want to make on these scenarios is that overall, we also see that they feature quite much lower electrification rates that we find feasible, and higher overall final energy consumption, and especially in the later decade of the scenarios. And overall, this is why we conclude that this might lead to overall inefficient way of transitioning into carbon neutrality. And then we also make some points around assumptions, especially regarding hydrogen and CCS cost. All right. And then we have two further comments regarding the climate resilience. We noted, and we also did that in our previous advice regarding the guidelines, that the climate scenarios that have been used are historic and not looking into the future. And this could jeopardize some of how we can use the EU energy infrastructure and how to make it climate resilient. We know that there are going to be changes in the weather, in extremes, and also in average temperatures, and this should be factored in. And we acknowledge that this is already being worked on. So we look forward to see this, but we had to note that this is not part of the 2040 scenarios. So unfortunately, this has not been implemented yet. Overall, regarding the scenario building process, we've seen also a lot of improvement. Transparency has improved. It also enabled us to make this detailed analysis, which we appreciate very much. We do see that there is some more improvements possible regarding transparency, the timeliness of the publications as well, and the participation. So we were looking very much forward to how the stakeholder reference group and also other stakeholders might be involved in the process in the future. Yeah, we also make a few comments regarding the clarity of the sources and some of the assumptions that would really help, and also regarding the how the assumptions are the ones that are most up to date. That's also something that can be discussed about. Yes, but overall we do see a great improvement from the 22 scenarios, but there is still some way to go until we can really see that they are fully aligned with the climate and energy targets towards 2050. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elena. It's now up to our next speaker, Eva Hennig, who is representing the stakeholder reference group. She will provide her views on the current cooperation between the SRG and the ENTSOs on the 2024 scenario cycle, and she will also explain to us what are the expectations of the SRG as regards the 2026 scenario cycles. I give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could you please open the first slide? Thank you. So I have the pleasure of being the co-convener of the stakeholder reference group, as we call it, the SRG. My other co-convener is sitting here, it's Andrzej, and it has been an interesting time. So we learned a lot, I think. For you to understand the timeline, because it has been mentioned before that we were sort of coming in late. yes, I think this was also due because the framework guidelines, which was setting up the SRG, was finalized in January 2023. Then we had an application process, and the framework guidelines is already defining who should be part of the SRG. So it's not the usual group of suspects whom you would find there. It's not a lobby group. It's a group of technical experts, and this is what we always have to come back to, that when we have discussions, that we are giving technical advice. We are there to help the ENTSOs. We are not there to disturb the process. We are there to help, and this is why it's a very broad group, and so the application process took some more time. We finally started working at the end of November, and then we got heaps and heaps of data. A lot. I think I counted 850 Excel files, and I love data. So it was a lot of data that we received because we were allowed, and we were also very thankful for the ENTSOs, because that was also the first time for them that we were able to look into the data, which was at that time still preliminary. And this is why we have a very, very straightforward compliance process within the SRG. So whatever we receive, it has to stay with us. It's not going to travel around Brussels. You know how Brussels is. As soon as it's out there, it's going to be on Politico. So we said we have strict rules. Whatever we do, it stays within the group. In February, we were able to publish our first 36 recommendations. They were a mixture between on the 2024 process still, even as it was late, and of course already looking into 2026, but I'm going to come later to this. And in April, the work began already on 2026 cycle, and we've been doing this now since then. Next slide, please. So what is the responsibilities? The responsibilities are coming from the framework guidelines, so it's not us who said, okay, we want to do this and that. We have clear responsibilities. We have to be independent. It's expert input. As I said, it's not an opinion. It has to be fact-based. So whenever someone of us has an idea, we always say, okay, where is it based from? Where is it coming from? How do we prove it? And I think this is very important. As we are a big mix of people, we have a lot of experience in that group. And this is great because everybody's coming from different corners. And this makes the work so interesting because we have also different experiences. We have to scrutinize all the inputs and the assumptions and the modeling methodologies of the scenarios. And we have an informed and balanced view and are reflecting majority and minority views. It's a co-creation of the stakeholder engagement plans, which is published by the ENTSOs. And it's an evaluation of the scenario development process and recommendations for improvement of the next cycle. So we really look at it and say, okay, what could become better? Next point, please. And who are our members? You can see them here. We have 23 members. It's association, it's think tanks, it's NGOs. It's a really big variety. And when we started working, I said once, all those people would have usually never sat in one room together because usually they wouldn't work together because they're coming from different sides, they have different opinions. And still we work very good together because we always come back to the point that we said it has to be fact-based. So whatever personal opinion we have or the association has, we have to leave it aside and say, okay, we are doing a joint work there. Next slide, please. So what are our tasks and activities that we have? So it's, of course, a selection of the conveners and vice conveners that was done last year. We had to write our own terms of reference, which had to be building, of course, on the framework guidelines. That was the beginning. The beginning took a bit more time to organize it. Then we have to facilitate the whole thing. So we are meeting every week. We have every week a half-hour workshop where we update ourselves. And we now have full working groups because we said if we want to go fast, and we always hear we have to be fast. So we said that means we have to go very fast, deeply into the topics. We had many workshops together with the ENTSOs where we try to understand the IT, a world which is installed at ENTSOC and ENTSO-E, and it's not so easy to understand it. And this is why we had the specialist grouping together. And we are managing all the relationships with everyone because we have the observers, which are the ENTSOs, we have the European Commission, we have ACER, we have EFSAP-CC. And of course, all this, when we're all together, would be more than 50 people. But that had to be organized. Next slide, or next point. And it's content-related work, and this is why I'm referring to what we have published. You can see it on the website. There is an SRG, Stakeholder Reference Group, button there when you go to the website of the scenarios. And you can see what we have come up with, what we found. The process is also not like, we're going to write down something. It had to be voted. Every recommendation that we had was going into a voting process, and we had to have a quorum and we had to have a majority. So it's really, we try to be very transparent on everything, and we try to be very fair for everybody. So every member in the group can really participate, and we call on everybody also to participate, so have the intelligence of the swarm in there. Next slide. That's the link where you can find it. Those are the groups of our first results that we had. So it's 36 of them. We covered 15 topics. And when you look at it, you can see that this was not scratching on the surface. This was going quite deep. We looked at hydrogen, how it was produced. We had a lot of suggestions on demand, and especially on demand, we really want to make sure, and this is an issue, we really want to make sure that the reference year that we're going to set up for 2026 is a good one. Means that all the data that lead into the reference year are coming from official statistics. I'm here, for example, I'm talking about heating statistics from the member states, so we can make sure that we don't have the differences that we see at the moment between the reference year and what we know what happened in 2019. So those are the parts, and we have specialists on hydrogen production, we have specialists on wind. One of our vice co-conveners is coming from Wind Europe. We had workshops on EVs and batteries, so we're also trying to take on board the innovative part. So an innovation in the sense of the TYNDP means something that was not in there the last time. And so those are the topics that we were looking up. Next slide. Those are our 4 working groups that we have. And the first working group is more the strategic one, where we look at the scenario storylines. There's also the discussion that we had with ACER and the new setup, how it's going to be. Working group 2 is the demand and electric vehicle. Working group 3 is anything that has to do with production and flexibilities. Flexibilities we know is a big issue. And the 4th one is CCS and GHG emissions. Next slide. So the key takeaways is 23 members, diverse background, that's great. And that knowledge is really carrying us. And I'm really thankful for everybody who's taken part of it, because they have to do this aside from their normal job. And it's a lot of responsibility. Next point. We delivered our first feedback, and we will continue to do so. I think that the ladies sitting next to me know how many questions we can ask. But we really try not to disturb the process, because we know it's a lot of stress. We really try to help. And this is, for example, why we decided in the demand group that we will go hunting for statistical data. That was not planned for the SRG. But we, as most of the customers are connected to the DSOs, sometimes we also have the better access to data. So we really want to help to make the process better. Next one. It's intense but fruitful. And it's an official process, so it's not like we came from somewhere. We were really created to do this. Next one. And yes, the last point, why were we set up? For transparency and for stakeholder engagement. I want to make clear, we are not the ones to do stakeholder engagement in the sense of the participation of the broad stakeholders. So there will always be consultations, and it's not us who will do the consultations, it's all of you. And I only can ask everybody to take part in the consultation, because this is really carrying the scenarios. So we do our best. We look at it and say, is this transparent? Can people understand it? We do scrutiny. And we have this participatory approach of the process. And I think this is also what ESAB-CC has been recommending. But still, everybody has to be part of this process. And we only can push as far as we can, but you still have to write your own consultations and you have to look at the data. Thank you very much. Oh, last picture, sorry. That's us. I think Vasiliki is sitting there at the end. Those are the two co-conveners and the two vice co-conveners. So if you have any questions, ask us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eva. We now have 10 minutes to present the 2024 TYNDP scenarios, and then we have 10 minutes for a question and answer session. I invite everyone here in the room and especially online to submit questions on Slido. We have seen there are a few messages in the chat, but we recommend using the Slido, which makes it much easier for us to collect all relevant questions and then present them to the speakers. So I will leave the floor now for 5 minutes to Alexander and Alan, and then to Laura and Dante. Let's start now with Alexander and Alan.
I will start. Thanks, Roberto. And as I see, we are slightly behind schedule. I try to be brief. So now we are talking about the TYNDP 2024 scenario strategy, and that's a brief recap of what we have done the last scenario cycle. As Alan already mentioned in its initial high-level messages, we have two different approaches for our scenarios. The one is the national trend scenario, which is an aggregation of 27 NECP-based scenarios. So we have collected the data from the member states, from each member state, from our members, and compiled this to a scenario compliant with the Union targets, in particular 2030. Then we have on the other side what we call the deviation scenarios, so distributed energy and global ambition. And these two scenarios are meant to capture the increasing uncertainty up to 2050. So the national plans usually cover 2030, I would say, very well, maybe 2040, but afterwards it gets already kind of blurry. Some countries have a target net zero 2045, for example, but afterwards it might be a bit uncertain. And that's where the deviation scenarios are there for, to capture an uncertainty based on storylines. So what if, that's the question we ask with these scenarios, what if we have certain technologies, what if residential and tertiary sector is developing in one way or another? What does it mean then for energy demand and supply? What does it mean for our infrastructure? That's what we tried to do with global ambition and distributed energy. And we can go to the next slide. Thanks, Roberto. Also important, and that was highlighted by several speakers before already, is the alignment of the TYNDP scenarios with ACER's framework guideline. So even though there was a slight mismatch between the publication of the ACER's framework guidelines and the TYNDP 2024 scenario, meaning the framework guidelines came after we already started working on the 2024 scenarios, we tried to align these scenarios as much as possible with the framework guidelines to ensure compliance. What are the elements in particular, more detailed, what we have done? So we have taken into account the national energy and climate plans, which were due 30th of July last year, and we try to consider them as much as possible. Of course, and that's important, if you look back from today, you might see deviations between our data set and the NECPs. But that's because our cutoff date for the data collection was before 30th of June. So for some countries, it might be quite well aligned. We see it's quite well aligned. For other countries, there might be some deviations. What we also did is to try to keep everybody informed about intermediate steps with workshops, also setting up a dedicated scenario website to keep everybody informed. We developed a 2035 scenario. However, this 2035 scenario is due to limitations on the timeline, rather to be looked at as a snapshot and not a fully fledged scenario. I think this is something I heard is high on the wish list from some stakeholders, so certainly something we have to think about. Then we launched the call for the SOG, as Eva just explained, within 3 months after the adaptation of the guidelines for ACER. We engaged with the SOG, so we got feedback already on the 2024 scenario, which was quite useful. And we started the discussion on how to expand the scenarios to take into account the low and high economy. Why do we need to start the discussion here? Because we have not selected this as a primary driver before. So there were a lot, and there are still some question marks. And I think that's also what this workshop today is for, about how to define and shape the low and high economic rights. That was my last slide, and now I will hand over to Nellen.
Thank you, Alex. In this slide, I will first mention what we said also in our report, that the TYNDP 2024 scenarios aligns with the energy efficiency first principle, the Union's 2030 energy and climate targets, and its 2050 climate neutrality objective. And what we did to demonstrate this includes, this information includes in this slide. So first of all, also you can see this slide, a bit of reflection what Majesh previously presented. When we talk about energy efficiency first and Union's 2030 targets for energy, we clarified this together with the Commission as well, but we look into the really Energy Efficiency Directive and Renewable Energy Directive, and what are binding targets set for the time when we were developing our scenarios. And the first target is the Energy Efficiency Directive. It's the reflects 11.7% reduction, which corresponds to final energy consumption values, and the prime, which is a binding target. And this has been calculated according to the definition that is stated in the Energy Efficiency Directive. So as also Majesh said, that we are almost the same assumptions. We are trying to get closer as much possible with the Eurostat definition and the definition in the Energy Efficiency Directive. But still, there are certain parts that cannot be fully aligned, and on these parts, we are doing some kind of assumptions. But in these slides, what you're seeing is that the kind of a worst case. So we can say that in the final energy consumption, we align with the binding target, and with the primary energy consumption, this is rather an indicative target, so that we just presented what is the calculated value. It exists slightly the indicative target. And then we look into the Renewable Energy Directive, and there is the target is 24.5% renewable share, and in our scenario, we see up to 45.4%, and that's up to comes from there, because the small differentiation between definitions with the Eurostat. In any case, the target is 42.5. So we see regarding the renewable share, our scenarios are quite ambitious with the high increase on the renewable developments. And then we see that we demonstrated in the report 55% greenhouse gas reduction comparing to the 1990. And also we considered, as referred in the regulation, the latest available member state non-binding agreements dated August 2023 into our scenarios, both in 2030 and 2040 and also 2050. And also for climate targets regarding to 2050, our main target is the net zero emissions in 2050. And this has been calculated based on the methodology that is consulted. In a way that these compliances are already demonstrated in the report, how they have been complied with. and these calculations has been done for the energy efficiency calculations straightforward. So there is no real methodology on it. We follow the energy efficiency directive and the renewable energy directive, and for the carbon budget and the net zero, it's been used, and also for the gap closing methodology, we used the consulted and revised methodologies for this matter. So I think for the next slide, I will hand over to Dante for presenting the modeling methodologies.
No problem. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm Dante Powell. I led the innovation team in the Scenario 2022 process, co-led with Laura. As time is fast spent, I will give a very quick overview of the innovations that we included in the 2024 scenarios to leave some time for questions. So we had 5 innovations that we implemented in the previous scenario cycle, or this scenario cycle. Some of them were new innovations, some of them were improvements to what we had done before. The first innovation was the hydrogen modeling. So one of the things that we did here is that we had some feedback in terms of the topology of the models. We had many, in the 2022 scenarios, there were many various concepts of how the hydrogen system would build out. And we had around 5 zones, let's say. One could be direct hydrogen producer sell to the market. One could be hydrogen that's currently available in local networks. One could be hybrids of these different kind of configurations. So one of the things we did is we reduced these zones down to 2. The second is that we added the production of synthetic fuels. So by reducing the zones, it meant that we could do a little bit more innovations in other areas. And here we looked at synthetic fuels, looking at the chemical stoichiometry process for how to create e-diesel, e-kerosene, and other fuels. The other thing we did was also we did explicit hydrogen to power. So this is using hydrogen as a fuel rather than methane in gas turbines to see what is the demand imposed by the electricity system on the hydrogen system. We always had the electrolyzers, which looked at the demand imposed on the electricity from the hydrogen, but now we have the other way around to close the gap. So those were the main innovations in the hydrogen modeling. The second was the EV modeling. We had an improvement where we tried to look at more of the flexibility of the transport, looking at things like demand side shifting, vehicle to grid. We also looked at the configurations in terms of home charging, street charging, different usage patterns, as we saw that really the EV modeling was more so contingent on consumer behavior rather than economic kind of changes in the energy landscape. 3, we looked at offshore modeling. So offshore modeling, of course, has been it's been a very hot topic in the past few years, let's say 4 to 5 years. There's strategies that are developed by the European Commission. In the ENTSO-E TYNDP, they already look at analyzing offshore projects. So this is well underway, and there's a full ONDP that is performed by ENTSO-E. So it made sense that we would integrate this into the scenarios. So that was a new innovation that we hadn't done before. The next was heat modeling. So one of the other areas of sectoral integration between electricity and hydrogen can be through hybrid heating, also between methane and electricity. So this, of course, hybrid heat pumps are, you have a home or a dwelling, you have a heat pump that may not be sized to the peak demand of the heat, but then you will also have a backup boiler in order to provide the, let's say, the support in terms of peak conditions. So here we integrated into the model a supply source for heat, which could either come from electricity or hydrogen. And it looked at different parameters. It looked at the prices within the systems. It looked at the coefficient of performances for the heat pumps, which is different depending on the country. So this was a new innovation. And then and then the next is the expansion modeling. And this was basically an innovation in how we run the models to make it a little bit more streamlined and efficient. If we go to the next slide. This is, yes, it's there's a lot in here, so I'm going to simplify it by color. So I'll direct you by position in the screen and by color. So if we go to the electricity sector on the left side of the screen, you see 3 nodes: electricity market, residential, tertiary, and EVs. I already mentioned what we did for EVs. The electricity market is more or less business as usual, what we've done for many cycles. And then the residential and tertiary, this was something we introduced in the 2022 cycle. But essentially what we wanted to see here is how the electric vehicles could be used. Well, it's a demand source, so it's a load source for electricity, but it also can be used as a source of flexibility. The residential and tertiary system, what we try to look at here is what is the economic rationale for installing rooftop solar. So you have to look at the differences between prices, between what a standard prosumer would buy and what a solar farm would look like, and also the cost in between. So this was the electricity sector. If we look in the middle sector, the purple, you'll see that we have zone 1 and zone 2. Zone 1 essentially represents, well, it would be what is currently existing within the hydrogen system at the moment, which is all local networks provided predominantly by SMRs and ATRs. We know that as we transition into to meet our climate neutrality targets, this will have to be decarbonized as well. So you see here that there's also a link between the electricity market and zone 1, which is a power to gas. So you can start introducing green hydrogen or other colors of hydrogen into the local networks. And then in zone 2, the one that's a little bit bigger, you see that we have hydrogen imports, and we have your big underground storages. So these will be your salt caverns and the likes of, and then you have some dedicated res as well. Then I mentioned the synthetic fuels, which is the very far right. This is the blue side. And here what we use is biogenic CO2 to feed the process, whatever that may be. So Fischer Tropsch would be for the e-diesel. If it was ammonia, you'd have Haber-Bosch, and SNG would be methanation. But we locate what biogenic CO2 is available based on the fuels usage within the scenarios, and then we combine that with the hydrogen in order to create the synthetic fuels. At the top, you'll see hybrid heating. So that's where it connects into the hydrogen market, which is zone 2, and also the residential and tertiary sector, which is where we are modeling the heat pumps. And then finally, on the bottom, you see the offshore hub. So in the offshore hub network, we more or less start from what we have within the ENTSO-E studies on the electricity side, but on the hydrogen side, there is nothing. There is no network that's being built. So on the hydrogen side, there is also a network of offshore hubs, which could use either dedicated electrolyzers just for hydrogen, or we could use a hybrid setting. And in the scenarios, you can see a little bit more of how these things are mapped out. But we do have a full methodology report that goes over what I've discussed in much more detail in this slide and the last slide, which I would, of course, always encourage everyone to have a look at. Okay, I think that was the last slide. So if you move to the next, then I can hand back over to, yeah, I'll hand back over. I'm not sure who will take on from here.
Thank you very much, Dante. I would now ask Leah from ENTSO-E to present the questions that are available on Slido so that speakers can reply. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think the first question is for my neighbor, Eva. So you mentioned that flexibility is a big issue. Could you please elaborate?
Yes, thank you for the question. So flexibility is seen as a possibility that you don't have to build as much infrastructure or as much production sites because you can use flexibility. Flexibility in the sense that you have customers which are ramping up and down their consumption, that you have the electric vehicles, that you have the batteries. So you have different sources of flexibility that you might be able to use. But when you think, we're not here to design products. Any kind of flexibility always comes with a backpack, and that is infrastructure, and that is sort of like a contract. Because if you have an industrial consumer who's working 24/7, he doesn't want to be interrupted every day for 3 hours. So there are limits to what you can do with flexibility, and this is something that we have to think about. This is why we have a working group within the SRG with specialists who have dealt with those kind of things in demand response. And I luckily was head of our demand response project in Tuga, and I was really frustrated at the end because the only thing I was allowed to touch was the ventilation, not the cooling, not the freezer, not the assembly line, not the elevator. So you came up with those worlds which don't have a lot of capacity. But still, I think that the world is evolving, and there might always be a price that a customer says, okay, at that price, I'm going to shut down my plant for a whole day. But when we deliver flexibility into the calculation, we really have to be sure that it's there, and not only for one day, but if you shut down something and you say the flexibility has to be there for several hours or even days, when we talk about weather-induced flexibilities, then it's a different thing. So it has to be realistic, and so this is why we're working on this, to find the assumptions that then can be put with formulas into the calculation, because it's not a fluffy concept. It has to be then something, if this happens, then this and this and this can happen.
Yeah, I agree with that. 100% flexibility will be a very important part. This is why we try to look at things like the vehicle to grid, the essentially delaying the charging, but that's just transport. We can also look into other sectors where you have tertiary industry and residential. That's the one. We do have some DSR in the scenarios which are submitted by TSOs that look at DSR in different industries. But indeed, I think for sure it's more developed on the electricity side, but there is more work that can be done. We also need to look at what type of flexibilities could be available on the hydrogen side as well. But I think one of the key enablers to the energy transition will be our ability to manage demand side flexibility as well, especially since the whole supply mix will be so variable. So yeah, I would echo your points, and I think it's a fair point to raise.
Thanks, Eva and Dante. Before I take another question online, is there someone in the room who'd like to ask a question? I take it as a no. Yes.
Now it's okay, right? Yeah. Okay. I'm Abhi from Euroelectric. So this is a question on final energy consumption. So earlier Nalan was saying, like, in terms of final energy consumption, the scenarios are meeting the targets. But when we look at the results, it's all mentioned in terms of final energy demand. So sometimes it's hard to interpret, or make calculations to compare. And always it's difficult to benchmark with Commission scenario, because Commission always publishes it in terms of final energy consumption. So can we interpret final energy demand as final energy consumption, or is there a difference?
Thank you for the question, Abi. Yes, we can consider that final energy consumption is corresponds to the final energy demand numbers within the certain sectors. So what I mean, we work together with the Commission, so we actually mirror how they calculated. So we took the final energy demand and also how it's written in the Energy Efficiency Directive. We took the final energy demand and we subtracted from energy demand, like we took all energy sectors, but we removed international shipping. We included international aviation. We excluded energy branch, non-energy use, and ambient heat. So, and we calculated the demand, overall final energy demand, and this is how the definition of the final energy consumption.
Okay, take the next question online, which is regarding the opinion of the Scientific Board for Climate Change. Could we reply to their comments, especially on hydrogen demand and cost?
Yep, I can elaborate a bit on these 2 points. So, regarding the hydrogen demand, it was developed in 2 different ways based on the scenarios. So, in National Trends Plus, we have collected the data from our members to be in line with the NECPs. So if a certain country, I take, let's say, Germany as an example, has a hydrogen strategy with a certain hydrogen demand corridor, then this was used in our scenarios. That's for National Trends 2030 and 2040. For distributed energy and global ambition, there the hydrogen demand is dependent on the storylines. So for distributed energy, we see the usage of more appliances that use electricity, for example, because that's part of the storyline. We also see more production of hydrogen as defined in the storyline in Europe. While on the other hand, in global ambition, we use a variety of appliances, for example, the residential and tertiary, including hydrogen to a limited amount, and we see more imports. So that's how the hydrogen demand was defined, and we have consulted the hydrogen demand for distributed energy and global ambition, not for National Trends Plus, because if someone claims that an NECP figure is not right, then this is not on the ENTSO's shoulders to change the NECP. I mean, that's nothing we can do. So that has been consulted as part of the consultation on the input parameters. We have actually also received feedback on this point and have amended the figures based on that feedback. Coming now from demand to the cost, I think the ABCC is looking towards the cost for electrolyzers, for example. And that's also something that actually is under the scrutiny of the SOG now. So also the SOG is looked into this topic. We have also received feedback from other stakeholders. So we will look into this topic. If the claim is made the costs are too low, most likely from today's perspective they are, because inflation kicked in. We see a decrease in prices almost for every technology a bit. So that's something we will factor in for the 2026 scenario cycle.
I don't know how much time do we have. I think we are late. Let's take one more question. Yeah. In the room, yes.
Hello everyone, Romain Lefebvre from EDF. So I have a few questions about your modeling. First, when we see your slide, it's suggested that the 2035 point is just an interpolation between 2030 and 2040. Second, is the model used in the TYNDP fully developed internally? And third, one last question. when we saw your slide about the whole modeling, it was suggested that the electricity market was only one copper plate. Is that actually what you do, or is it just a way to present it?
Right, I will take the first two questions and then leave it the last one to Dante. The first question is indeed the 2035. For the 2035, we didn't collected all the data sets. In our planning, it was to look at 2030, 2040, and 2050. After a year when the ACER framework guideline developed, and we see that indeed we need to also show a 2035 horizon. It was too late to collect data sets again. So instead, what we did is to, in the modeling, we model in the 5 building blocks. So input data sets are interpolated, but the supply and the modeling results are a result of the optimization from the modeling. The second question was...
is the model internal?
Yeah. I mean, Dante, you can respond to that as well. We use, I will hand over here to Dante. It's better.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So for the model is developed fully internally. So there's many data. So we use Plexus, first of all. We collect a lot of data from the TSOs. We do a large consultation process, and then we create hourly time series and all of these inputs for the model. And the model is built internally. ENTSO-E actually build the model for the scenarios, but it is a model that's fully built from scratch, and a new model is built each cycle of the process. And then maybe I can go on to the last one, which is the market copper plate. So we don't use a copper plate within the scenario. So the scenario, well, the topology of the model is based on a bidding zone topology, at least for the electricity. It was for power market, so yes, for electricity, it's on the bidding zone. The level of infrastructure that is used is based on the reference grid that is typically comes from one of the TYNDPs. For a little bit more information on the reference grid, I refer you back to ENTSO-E's documentation on it. But typically they have a year, cutoff year, let's say it's 2027 for 2030, maybe 2035 for 2040, based on criteria of maturity of the projects. So it's not a copper plate. We don't have copper plates within the model, except for internally within the bidding zone. So we don't model the 10 nodes in Germany or 12 nodes in France or whatever. But we model cross-border, well, cross-bidding zone capacity. And these are taken from the reference grid in the TVPs.
Thank you both. I think now it's time to move for the coffee break. Well deserved. When do we convene again, Roberto?
Yeah, I would say we take 10 minutes maximum for the coffee break. So we are back in 10 minutes. Thank you. Okay, welcome back to the meeting room. We can restart our workshop after the coffee break. We now have 20 minutes for the presentation of the 2024 TYNDP scenarios. We have in particular 10 minutes presentation, and then again 10 minutes for a question and answer session using the Slido tool. We start with the demand figures, and we have Alexander from ENTSO and Nalan from ENTSO-E. So I would leave the floor to Nalan.
So now we can dive in a bit further in the results of the 2024 scenarios. We can start with the demand. The first slides is kind of a reminder from when we presented this same slide last year in July for our workshop, explaining how we will where we end up with the demand with the number of collection from the TSOs and volumes of the final energy consumption, which is final energy demand, according to the definition cited below. And we foresee that there is an 8% gap between the targets and the energy efficiency directive target. And this should correspond to 18 terawatt hour among 8,873 terawatt hour in 2030 EU 27 level. So to close this gap, to further process on our studies, we developed a gap closing methodology that has been consulted during this consultation period, which has been found by the majority of the stakeholders fair and pragmatic. The approach was simplistic, so what we did is to proportionally by reducing based on the country and the fuel with the most highly polluting fuels, so starting with solid and crude, and it was already enough to compensate this overshoot. So this doesn't mean that we look into details, have sectorial or country basis, what needs to be done in the country basis, because this is beyond the mandate or also beyond our scope. So as the majority of stakeholders found this methodology fair and pragmatic. And of course, this methodology will be looked into that when we start the 2026 cycle. In the next slide, we can see one of the important high-level message from our study is the energy efficiency. So energy efficiency is key step to achieve the EU climate and energy objectives. So in the first graph, you can see the final energy demand, this time all sectors, not the sectors that are defined in the EED. And we see 2019 reference is based on Eurostat, and in 2030 already reduction of 14% in all energy sectors. And in 2050 further reduction of the demand in distributed energy and global ambition to 33% and 27% respectively. And one of the important messages here is that the increase in direct electricity, as it is the most efficient solution to achieve use energy and climate targets. So here below in the demand, you will see that even the demand is reducing, the electricity increase in the demand in the sectorial basis is increasing over the years. So already we need to have a high increase, at least 15% of increase in the direct electrification in order to ensure the energy efficiency targets. So, and when we see in the details, we see more sectorial details, we see more electrification increase potential in especially EV sector, so transport sector, so especially with the uptake of the electric vehicles, and also residential and tertiary sectors with the heat pumps. So the other message that is given here is that it is possible to have this increased efficiency with having the starting point also in the small scale technologies and active participation of the consumers as well. And this requires, of course, also improving the existing technology to gain efficiency, but also transition in the more efficient technologies. And not that, but least, as also we see the increase in insulation rates, especially has an important factor to reduce this, increase this energy efficiency. And final point is also important, as we see that the sectoral integration and further integration of the hydrogen system enables the system efficiency and manage the demand very well. So this is what we are trying to also capture in the modeling by capturing this sector integration as Dante presented earlier. In the next slide, I will talk a bit about the renewable development. Here you see I will talk about the supply figures. You see here the total primary energy supply mix, and starting from 2022, from Eurostat again, and going towards to 2050. So here you will see, first maybe I want to remind you that 2030 national trends is the starting point for all scenarios. So you see already in 2030 in reduction in the energy supply corresponding to these energy efficiency and the flexibility measures, but also you will see that huge increase in the renewable generation. One of the important message here, to achieve climate targets, we need already all renewables. So we need all renewables, not only wind and solar, but also biofuels. But majority of this deployment, we see already early development and wind and solar, because this helps us to minimize the risk of non being compliant with the climate targets in the long term. So, so here you see in 2030, solar and wind generation reaching threefold and approximately ninefold in 2050. And also we see another important thing is that natural gas supply phased out by 2050, and also low carbon sources like nuclear and blue hydrogen, which we showed as blue in the below graph, are also contributing to decarbonize the energy system. Here in 2050, you see a little gray area fossil fuels. You will see that these are coming from international shipping and international aviation. On the next slide, I think it's going to be the last slide to show you a bit more electricity capacity and electricity generation mix. And here the most striking part is that wind and solar role in the power generation. By 2050, almost 90% of power generation is supplied by wind and solar, and this also emphasizes the importance of the flexibilities and also this remaining. I mean, in 2050, we see that all electricity generation is decarbonized. So this wind and solar is contributed, complemented with the other renewables, and also low carbon sources, and only renewables are projected to supply almost 100% of the electricity supply, but the remainings are also decarbonized fuels. So one or the other important point is that also scientific boards raised that electricity demand for final use and electrolysis. You will see the table on the right below. So which shows that what I showed you as a demand before, it was the direct electrification. You will see the total electricity demand, including for electricity required for the electrolyzers, and by 2050, for electricity required for electrolyzers is expected to represent nearly 1/3 of the total electricity demand. So our infrastructure needs to be ready for this change as well. So for the next slide, I will hand over to Alexander.
Okay, thanks, Nellen. So for the next two slides, I would like to lead you a bit through the methane demand, hydrogen demand, and the respective supply for methane and hydrogen in our scenarios. So let's start first on the left with the methane demand per sector. You see a decrease of the methane demand in 2030 already, and then a much more pronounced decrease afterwards. So it's around 72-76% decrease of the methane demand, which means that the methane demand will be reduced across all sectors. And also in line with what Nellen said about the electricity production, we also see a sharp decline of the methane usage in the power generation part. So then on the right side, you see the hydrogen demand. Maybe a word about the reference value, which shows 0. What we show here is the hydrogen demand that is supposed to see and be used with a hydrogen grid. So today we have hydrogen production in Europe. I think it's around 250 to 300 terawatt hours, which is mostly coming as byproduct and is produced and consumed on site. So we are aware of this, but what we are looking here at in our scenarios is a potential hydrogen demand to be transported with a hydrogen grid. That's why there's a zero. If we compare now this, what I've mentioned, the 250, 300 terawatt hours today's hydrogen production and resulting in a hydrogen demand, we see an increase already in 2030 for national trends, going up to around 500 terawatt hours. And then we see the ramp up rather between 2030 and 2040, so that the hydrogen demand is expanding in various sectors. Here to mention the transport sector shows an uptake of hydrogen. We also have limited use in residential and tertiary, but we will also use a little bit in power generation. So the ramp up happens between 2030 and 2040 in our scenarios. And if we go to the next slide, this is now the corresponding supply to the demand for methane and hydrogen shown on the previous slide. As the demand for methane declines rapidly until 2050, we also see a complete change of the supply pattern. Today, as you're probably all aware, most of the methane demand is natural gas imported to Europe. This will change over time. So biomethane will become the dominant source for the methane supply. And most of this biomethane will be produced in Europe. So that will really change the supply pattern on the methane side. Plus, we see that synthetic methane will also play a role, but rather to complement, decarbonize the methane supply entirely. And this enabled us to phase out any natural gas import in our scenarios in 2050. Now, if we look at the right side for the hydrogen supply, as I mentioned, we have today the domestic production of this 250 terawatt hours. Also here we will see a change of the supply pattern. Power to gas will play a dominant role in the long term, and it will be complemented by hydrogen imports. Depending on the storyline, you will see more hydrogen imports or less hydrogen imports, because we want to see how does the infra react if there will be more or less hydrogen imports. Also, the hydrogen supply, that's important to mention here, is completely decarbonized by 2050. If we have some SMR, so steam methane reforming, autothermal reforming in 2050, the methane that will be used for this case will be either biomethane or synthetic methane. So we also don't use natural gas in this case, which means we decarbonize even that way of providing hydrogen supply. That would be all for demand and supply, and I think we can go now to the Q&A.
Is there any question on this from the room?
Hello, great. Killian Todderdell with Form Energy. Just wondering, as you look forward at the scenarios as you're looking at the scenarios for power generation, I'm going to guess if you're meeting demand 80, 90% with wind and solar, there's a lot of overbuild, especially as I think the maximum storage you have incorporated is 4 hours. I'm just wondering, do you see huge volumes of curtailment? Are you assuming those are captured by electrolyzers, or how do you see the sort of share of overbuild versus the power mix?
When we displayed the modeling methodology, it can be seen that some are flexibility sources not only limited to the battery storages. So we tackle this flexibility and the curtailment issue I mean, we see some level of curtailment, of course, but mainly it is managed by the integration of the sector, not only within the electricity market, but also use of electrolyzers and storage from hydrogen as well, and also the gas generation, the gas-fired power generations, and also the role of the more small-scale consumer triggered flexibilities like the vehicle to grid and increased role of vehicle to grid and this consumer side flexibilities. And also we have in the model demand side response that becomes applicable at certain costs. So this is how we also plan at certain model at certain point this demand side flexibility. I don't know whether Lara or Dante would like to further comment on the on this issue, because I'm sure they know better.
I think you gave a pretty good answer there, Nalan. Indeed, there is a lot of renewables built, but it was mentioned earlier today by the European Scientific Board that there is a lot of hydrogen, and a lot of that will need to be green hydrogen, and then you have the storage facility within the hydrogen system, as well as the flexibilities in EVs and storages and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I think you gave a good response.
So about the ES-ABCC remark, because what you presented, yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. What you presented, especially about hydrogen, have been criticized by ES-ABCC. So what are you going to do about this? Are you going to correct the scenarios, or are you going to take this into account for the next cycle? And if yes, are you going to take these criticizes for the choices of the PCIs?
Yeah, I think rightfully you mentioned that there is, let's say, some criticism on the part, but as we also mentioned, we used, let's say, quite a lot of stakeholder engagement in the input figures when they were available. So we do recognize that things develop. But process-wise, currently, we have submitted our scenario report for, let's say, opinion of ACER and approval by European Commission. They have the possibility to ask for, let's say, updates. So we want to, let's say, also take that into account and to see what to pick up. At least we will take these elements into consideration going to 2026, of course. But for the current process, it already went in the process for approval. So we need to, let's say, also follow that process.
For example, if it's validated by the European Commission and ACER, for the choice of PCIs, you're going to foster hydrogen projects, while ES-ABCC told that there is maybe too much hydrogen considered.
Well, probably it's for the Commission. We still have not made a decision which scenario will be chosen, especially for 2040. For 2030, we'll have one national trends. So we have to see which scenario is the closest, most reliable. And having looked at it, we have the decision which scenario is used. But as was explained, there is no scope for changing the current scenarios. So I think it's also the lesson to be learned for the next cycle.
Another question from room. Yeah, there are some.
Okay. Hello. Just a quick question on, I see in all of the scenarios there's a big build out of renewables in all of the countries. I was wondering to what extent there's been limits applied on spatial limits applied to if these where in each country there are limits to the amount of renewables that can be deployed based on land availability and so on. And the other question I had was with all this amount of renewables, if there's been a consideration on restrictions being placed on for operational reasons, and if the system can absorb the system, or the European system can, to what extent it can absorb all this renewables on the operational side in terms of stability and how, you know, in real time you may have forecasting errors and all these things. Thanks. So 2 questions, but
yeah, thank you for the question. They are quite valid. We have received this question before regarding to the land use. But in our scenarios, we don't go into detail how the feasibility of the renewables development will look like further. What we do is that we collect the information from TSOs according to their country national perspective, let's say national knowledge, what is the technical capacity and what is the potential. So, and we don't go skyrocket in the renewables, we have a limit. So this is how we tackle this problem. So more in an, not really in the looking in the detail, but introducing an ex ante limit. And not only from the TSOs, but also we kind of, what we do is also we compare these trajectories. I mean, we call it trajectories. So we collected the potential extends country basis and the minimum limit and the maximum limit, so the expansion is in between. But meanwhile, we also consult them so that to hear other experts' opinion on whether their what is their how this is sounds, this potential limits, the maximum limits is sound from the perspective of other stakeholders such as Wind Europe. So in a way, this is how we tackle. And of course, in our scenarios, these are used to assess what will be the supply and the demand parts needed to have the targets, meet with the targets. But then we stop there. We don't do further analysis on the operational parts. So this is the study that we publish, and then there are, of course, other questions needs to be followed up.
So the maximum is on.
Yeah, it's the trajectory.
Operational. There's no operational constraints taken into account for the maximum, but there are the other constraints you mentioned.
Yeah, there are. I mean, the limit is that what is the technical and in the national strategies potential capacity for the each renewable capacities. So, and then this has been used as a limit and also consulted. So as under the trajectories filed to see whether we are missing anything from the view from the other European stakeholders. Eva, you want to add something?
There's some topic that we haven't talked about. So the TYNDP and the scenarios never take into account that cannot, not because they don't want to, but that's too complex, that 99% of the customers in gas and electricity are connected to the distribution level. So this means that whatever we are thinking out here and demand, also on electricity demand, has to be distributed at distribution level. This also means that when we talk about renewables, wind and sun, also there, most of them by numbers, not the biggest size, but also they are connected to the distribution grids, which means that we will see thresholds happening at a level that we do not see at the TYNDP level. And I don't know how to solve this. This is a discussion that we've had since we have the TYNDP, but it's now we are coming closer to those points that we see that we cannot inject the electricity because it's just too much. And that has always to be taken into account that there's a level in between that we don't see in the scenarios, but it's physically there.
Thank you, Eva. I will take the last question from Lena Kitzing, who raised her hand. You have the floor.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Please go ahead.
It was just mainly a remark regarding the hydrogen, because so basically what we're saying is that the scenarios contain more hydrogen than we think is feasible. And what we write in our report is that we should focus the hydrogen demand and production demand in those areas where direct electrification is very limited and problematic, right? So we do acknowledge that we probably, especially in the early years, we need to build as much hydrogen as possible. It's just when we compare it to what we find or what the scientific community finds feasible, it's larger than what seems feasible in those ranges. And then compared then at the same time with the very low electrification rate, this combination becomes problematic. But it's not that we are against hydrogen at all or in any other way. I just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you very much. I don't know if anybody wants to reply here from the panel. No? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So thank you for the comment, Lena. We can move on to the next item on the agenda, the presentation of the 2026 framework for the TYNDP scenario cycle and the next steps. So I leave the floor again to Alexander Katlitz and Nalan Boyuk. Thank you.
And then will you start or?
Yeah, I'm waiting for the screen. So here I'm starting with the first presenting of TYNDP 2026 scenarios framework, and then Alexander will present how we came up with this scenarios framework and what are the first steps we need to acknowledge with this framework and what will be the next steps. So here you will see that the green line that represents NECP scenarios and also closely take into account the Commission's latest scenario. So this scenario is in the regulation and in the guideline referred as bottom-up and detailed central scenario, which corresponds to national trends plus reflecting latest updated national strategies. And with the close remark, as this will be reflecting the national strategies and the NECPs, where they are outdated, we will need to bring them in line with the latest policies and the technological cost developments. And there is where we will seek for, again, extensive stakeholder engagement. Here we see that the time frame where we start at 2024 at this moment, where we will publish in early 2026 or end of 2025. In between, we will develop the scenarios, which means that we need to decide on a cutoff date where we can take the latest updated NECPs and latest Commission scenarios to be taken into account. And this will be still decided together with the SRG's input. And when we will soon publish the detailed timeline, this will be in the information. I'm just telling you that to be aware of that the cutoff date where we will take the latest information will not be 2026, but will be rather in 2025. And then based on this information that we have, we will have 2030, 2035, and 2040 national trends plus scenarios. As highlighted in also the guideline, 2035 is becoming more and more important for us. So that's why this time we aim for developing a full-fledged collecting the data sets also for the input parameters on 2035. So this will be additional, of course, time-consuming activity for the TYNDP scenarios. And then in the light blue and dark blue, we will explore the economic variance. So these economic variance scenarios deviates directly from ENTSO-E and in a balanced way as defined in the regulation, which means that if there is high in the one side, there needs to be a lower explored in the lower side. And it needs to be aligned with the European targets. And still, we don't know how this will be based, which parameters this will be based on. And this is where we start today already in the workshop to discuss these items together with you. And then in the right, we see the purple 2045 and 2050. Here, we need to include this 2050 cycle to demonstrate the net zero compliancy. But decisions still needs to be made on how we will develop this central scenario in 2050, where NECPs will be mostly lacking information. And of course, this methodology will be consulted as well. So this is the high-level overview on how 2026 scenarios framework will look. And I will hand over to Alex here to explain the next steps.
Okay, thanks, Nellen. Here, on this slide, we would like to shed a bit of light how we came to this decision, so to avoid just dropping some framework for the TYNDP 2026 scenario, so I can say, okay, that's gonna it, and we go with it, and you have couldn't really follow our steps. So in March this year, we assessed the scenario framework to ensure the full compliance with the framework guidelines. We then, in May, discussed the possible options with the stakeholder reference group, the European Commission, and also with ACER. And based on these discussions, we then concluded on the option that Nellen has presented as the best that can fully comply with the guideline. This also means, and I saw the question on Slido also about the uncertainty, this also means a bit of change of the mindset. So we will go now more towards a policy-driven and goal-oriented scenarios. So our scenarios will show what is necessary to reach the EU targets, which also means as a consequence that the differentiation between the variants are less significant because the emphasis, the focus is on the central scenario, which is then complemented by the variants to show the robustness of the central scenario. And we also developed the scenarios as indicated within the time frame stated in ACER's framework guidelines. What does it mean? It means we need to end, we're supposed to end the scenario process end of 2025, which effectively gives us, as we have July, beginning of July, we have started a bit, but still we are in the very early steps of the scenario process, 1.5 years. Which is significantly shorter than the 2 years we had for the 2024 cycle and the 2 years we had for the 2022 cycle. And this results also for us in a bit of difficult situation. So we have to see that we develop the variants which might be perceived as less complex, for example, with DE and GA. But it also resonates with the feedback we received that the E and GA might be too complicated or might be not transparent enough. So it's pro and con here. And also a bit of downside of cutting the scenario process short is that there will be limited room only for further innovations. That's also something we still have to discuss. We have a long list of possible innovations, so don't worry, we are not short on this, we are rather short on time. So we need to see what we can do. Go to the next slide. So we have published a stakeholder engagement plan on our website. so that we have created a dedicated website for the 2026 scenarios. We will also publish soon a more detailed timeline and also a calendar of public webinars. Important here, mark in your agendas, we have a public consultation on input parameters and methodologies planned for May, June 2025. So we will basically replicate our approach from the 2024 cycle, that we rather ask you for feedback already on the input parameters, which are definitely shaping the scenarios to a large extent, instead of presenting you a complete full scenario set and then ask you for feedback. So that we involve you earlier in the process, that you cannot definitely still shape the scenarios. And I think for the sake of time, I will skip the timeline here. If you want to have more information, you can check out the website or reach out to us. And with that, I will give back to Roberto.
Thank you, Alex. We're now foreseeing a few minutes for another question and answer session. So I will start first of all with questions from the room, in case there is anyone. Okay, I see Vasiliki. You have the mic, just a second.
Thank you very much. I'm Vasiliki Klonari from Wind Europe. I asked my question also in the Slido. So until now, we mentioned alignment with the national targets and the EU targets, or the EC targets on energy and climate. Does this explicitly mean on electrification? If there are targets on electrification and renewables at national level, that this will be modeled as well? And similarly for the Commission's targets for 2040, electrification and renewables, has this been decided, or is this under discussion? It hasn't been explicitly said today. So this is why I'm asking for the stakeholders to understand.
I can take this. So we aim to, or we have to comply with our scenarios for EU targets, which means what was presented earlier today, final energy consumption, to show that we comply with the energy efficiency first principle, renewable share. So we do comply with targets that are in legislation. That doesn't mean that we are, let's say, so narrow-minded and not looking left and right, what is happening. But if a target is not yet in legislation, it's hard for us to see that as a hard target. And that's why we keep this in mind. We see what is happening on an EU policy level, but it would not represent a hard target. Not, let's say, but I don't want to talk for Commission, but I guess it would not prevent Commission probably from approving our scenarios. But if we would miss final energy consumption, there's no way of getting approval for scenarios. I would make this distinction.
The national targets, if there are targets at national level, will these be considered for electrification and renewable capacities? Yeah?
I would assume if there's a target on a national level and we collect the data from the respective country with this target, that the data we collect is already reflecting this target. We don't do a specific check on these national targets, indeed, but I would assume that the TSOs are making sure that the data set they submit to us, that this is compliant. And one last remark on this, if you stitch together 27 data sets, it's not necessarily meeting the EU targets. That's one other thing, but we assume the data sets we receive comply with the national policies. Yeah.
Thank you, Alex. Another couple of questions from here. Thank you. Yeah. Andrei, can you stand up, please? Thank you.
Yes, now it should work. Hello, Andrzej Zaglarz from RGI, and also a question maybe more to the European Commission and the ENTSOs. because Alan mentioned that the cutoff date would probably be 2025, deciding about the policies. And also, Maciej, in your presentation, you mentioned about the need of inclusion of the reference scenario, and that also should be published at the beginning of 2025. And my question is whether you have been working within the reference scenario to make the data that would be used for the reference scenario applicable for the tool that is being used within the TYNDP, because the quality of the data and the formats are different. And in order to save this time that is extremely stretched, maybe already at this stage, because now it's the time where the reference scenario is being built, would make sense to coordinate and to make sure that the data is applicable, and then the reference scenario could be used as well.
Thank you. That's precisely the idea, because the reference scenario will be published too late for the process. So the idea is that for the reference scenario, normally we would use the NECP data, but there is also a dedicated data collection from member states. And we want to use this dedicated data collection also to be shared with the colleagues from ENTSO-E to streamline the process. So we to coordinate at the earlier stage, not really, because there will not be a final product available on our side that could be then used for the TYNDP 2026 scenario development. So indeed, the coordination has to take now at the early stage of development of both processes.
Another question from the room.
Hello, Killian Totterdell again with Forum Energy. Just wondering, with about sort of 20 odd different long duration energy storage technologies coming onto the market over the next couple of years, do you see LDES being incorporated into the next cycle, perhaps through maybe some sort of technology archetypes? I appreciate there's a lot of technology variance within them in terms of, you know, durations, cycles, efficiency, etc. But do you see that as a work stream to try and integrate that into the TYNDP process? Thank you.
I can take this one maybe. What we are going to do is that, I mean, I cannot say right now yes or no. What we are going to do is to create an innovation roadmap. And in the innovation roadmap, we will gather all the innovation requests and the possibilities that we collected from stakeholders, SRG, and also TSOs. And what we need to do is to prioritize things. And considering the limited time period, we need to see what innovations needs to go first, because one of the most important things that the Commission also stressed is the timeline. So, and as you see right now, the change in the approach is the biggest innovation right now, right? So it will take a lot of time to bring national scenarios is a really detailed level. So what we do is that in September, October, we plan to publish the innovation roadmap, which will be consulted and discussed with the SRG. And in this innovation roadmap, we want to give an information on what are the things included in the roadmap, and what we plan to do is for this cycle and for the upcoming cycle. And eventually we will consult this as well, so that for this cycle it will be set, but for next cycle it's a living innovation roadmap, so that it can be updated, the prioritization can be changed. So
Thank you. I would close here the Q&A as we are running a little late. So I will move now to the next presentation. It's a first in the TYNDP cycle, and I'm happy to introduce Abel Enriquez, who is here to present NOH, and in particular its involvement in the TYNDP scenario cycle. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberto, and good afternoon, everyone. I know that we are a bit running late and that the lunch is waiting for us, but in any case, I will not try to be very long. It's fine, yeah. So before... Yeah. So before starting... It's fine now? Yeah, thank you. No, there is still.
It's not my. I'm muted. I don't.
Take it this one. Hello? It works. Okay, has been a good start. So, ENO, pre-ENO, yeah, as you probably are aware of, we are in the foundational process to set up ENO next year. At this moment, my intervention is going to be very, let's say, basic, as ENO is not there yet. We don't have working groups. We don't have strong position to present. But in any case, I wanted to take the opportunity, and I really thank ENTSO and ENTSO-E for the invitation to speak here today, to come to you and to introduce a little bit where we are and the next steps. So where we are. If you are following our LinkedIn account, if not, I invite you to do it right now. We are, a number of companies, more concretely 37 entities, have been working hard since last January to set up NOH according to the upcoming regulation, which will be published in a few days. During the last 6 months, these 37 future HTNOs have been, as I said, discussing and negotiating the new statutes, the new rules of procedure for the new entity. On the 18th of June, as you can see in the picture, there was a political agreement reached on how these statutes and rules of procedure will look like. At this moment, this was the ceremony with the European Energy Commissioner, and now everyone is more or less satisfied with the work achieved. So at this moment, we are completing the statutes and the rules of procedure. We will submit them to ACER and to the European Commission before the 1st of September, as the regulation requests. And from there will be a period where ACER has, let's say, 4 months to give an opinion. After ACER giving an opinion, the European Commission will have another 3 months to prepare their own opinion. And after ACER and the European Commission opinions, we will, the future HTNOs, we will set up NOH accordingly. So you could wait, or you could expect NOH to be there before summer next year. Officially, by October 2025, we expect to be fully operational and to start delivering our tasks according to the regulation. So this is a little bit let's say the landscape for ENO. Last week we were already in the Energy Infrastructure Forum, also presenting the current process where we are. In this forum we were also able to present a couple of slides on offshore hydrogen and on repurposing. In the forum we also got some homework to do together with ENTSO and with ACER. We are now supposed to work on principles for repurposing. So we are start to have now already tasks to do on top of the regulation. And yes, and let's say we will start soon, probably after summer, setting up a team which will start working on all this and to do this preparatory work. In terms of the TYNDP process, as I said at the beginning, I cannot say too much. And what I put in this slide is just a collection of the tasks that we have to do according to the regulation, starting from the first box in the top center and then going clockwise. The third initial boxes, the first 3, refer to the deliverables we need to deliver. So they are basically, we need to participate in the development of the energy system-wide CBA. We will have to work also together with ENTSO-E on the interlinked energy markets, a network model, taking into account not only electricity, but also natural gas, hydrogen transport, infrastructure, gas storage, hydrogen storage, LNG, and terminals and electrolyzers. NOH will have to work also on joint scenarios, infrastructure hard gaps, and the European supply adequacy outlook. So yeah, these are basically our duties. And then the two following boxes are related to the TYNDP process itself, because as you are probably aware of, the current TYNDP 2024 has been prepared by ENTSO. The TYNDP 2026 for gas and hydrogen will be also developed by ENTSO, but with a strong involvement of the hydrogen stakeholders and ENO. And then from 1st of January 2027, NOH will take over, and we will be fully responsible for our own TYNDP for hydrogen. In this process, we, as ENO, we want to give a paramount importance to the involvement and contribution from the stakeholders. 2 months ago, we launched a public consultation, as in our website, where we invited stakeholders to give us views about our rules of procedure for consulting stakeholders. We received approximately 10 answers from different stakeholders, and we thank you for that. And based on the input received, we are adapting our rules of procedure for consulting stakeholders, and we are planning to launch, let's say, the state-of-the-art rules for involvement contributions of all of you. We want you to be comfortable with our processes. We want you to be fully engaged in our processes, and we hope to be successful in that. After finishing up our TYNDP 2028, you expect that we will have to submit it to Acer, and Acer will have to do or to prepare an opinion, and which we'll have to take into account. And finally, and last but not least, for all these processes, it's also extremely important to have a robust and strong cooperation with ENTSO and ENTSO-E, and we are looking forward to that. According to the regulation, we can even set up common working groups to deliver these common duties that we have in the regulation. So yeah, from our side, we are just opening and remaining totally available for future cooperation with all of you and with our sister organizations, ENTSO and ENTSO-E. Thank you very much for your time. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Abel. Now, before the lunch break, just a few words from Alan, summarizing the morning session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your active participation. It's a pleasure to see, let's say, what has been done and picked up. I hope we were able to give you a good introduction of what exactly we have delivered by ENTSO-G and ENTSO-E, and the steps taken to innovate, to improve, but also to deliver according to the requirements. So what is, let's say, in the booklet that you were able to pick up here, or let's say, look at the website. Listening to, let's say, also our invited guest speakers, part of the process, we have also heard that it's a valuable product up to creating the PCI list to get that approved, to deliver indeed the infrastructure. A continuous need for focus on consistency and possible data imperfections, get rid of those, was mentioned. Further increase of transparency, still welcome. So let's say, wanting to know everything and being pick up there. So that's great. But also, let's say, heard that already 36 recommendation has been given by the SRG, while they only started beginning of this year, more or less. So from that perspective, looking a bit as a conclusion, with the scenarios, we try to look in the future, but that's not hard science. It's a process of collaboration, using different views to create the most likely scenarios. I'm happy, really happy to see that it's recognized a lot that we have done already quite big steps going forward into integrating a full energy landscape for the whole of Europe into this report. Doesn't imply that we are already ready and that we can just copy what we did. There is still more to do. The mentioned climate database, for example, by also the scientific board, was recognized, and we're already preparing to pick that up. 2026 should be, let's say, implementing that one. But it also means that we have to use consistent sources. So trying to, let's say, look at indeed fact-based the policy drivers, whether it's national or European, and not indeed perceptions or IDs. And the other part that is, let's say, an added value of the ENTSOs picking this up is the iterative loop that we can do together with our members to look at, okay, is what we are putting into the system, does it deliver plausible results? Does it fit with what we can expect? Because we're also using all the experience of our members to do some quality control during the process. So that's, let's say, also very important. A glimpse has been given of what we can expect for 2026. For the ones here present after lunch, we're still expecting a lot of input, but at least, let's say, it's good to be aware that you have been invited in the room Ambition, and this room is called Ambition. So let's say it's also our ambition, I think, and that has been shared, a clear planning with cut-off data collection, delivery of in the end of 2025. It's going to be hard. We don't have it completely, let's say, fixed yet in our planning, but we're working on that one. That also requires a streamlined data collection. So happy to hear that European Commission is also, let's say, working together to achieve this. We're looking at all energy carriers, stakeholder involvement. Very happy with indeed already what SRG has been able to pick up, but also using the scientific advisory board recommendations. They're valuable for us. And we're aiming, as I mentioned, to take this NT+ scenario to really a full-fledged scenario, which is robust, where we can, let's say, use our models and tools in a much faster way. So creating this robustness that Nalan also mentioned. Yeah, and then, of course, we need to comply with all the legislation. So the framework guidelines in full force, cooperating between all the associations, including NOH, let's say, that has been mentioned. But I think, let's say, and with that, I want to, let's say, finalize. The collaboration is not only what is legally needed, but it's also, let's say, the collaboration just from, let's say, our common interest to deliver a good scenario where we can use and go further to create, let's say, this zero carbon world within Europe. So having done all this, I hope that we can, let's say, deliver next time an even more transparent and comparable, let's say, comparative, let's say, set of data that you can use, that you can pick up and make it digestible for you. So looking forward in, let's say, working together, but maybe first in the digestible way of looking. I think it's time for lunch. So
yes, indeed. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alan. So we go for lunch now, and we meet again here in the room at 1:45. Thank you. Good afternoon. We are ready to restart our workshop. We have now a detailed discussion on building economic variance. We have, first of all, 25 minutes of introduction from the panelists, and then we will stop the Teams meeting so that we can focus on a fishbowl session here in the room that is ready. I will now leave the floor to the first speaker this morning, this afternoon, that is again Alexander Ketlitz with Nalan Boyuk presenting the objective of this session. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I will present this slide actually. Just last minute change. If you can move to the next one. Yeah. The one before. Yeah, just before. Yes, that one, thank you. So just a quick point for information about where we stand today on the discussion on the variance. So This is brand new in this scenario cycle. As you see, we've been discussing for a few months already in the SRG and also between ENTSO-E and ENTSO-E on how to go about that, what are the variants. What we expect from you today, what we really hope to get from the discussion, the fishbowl format that I will explain a bit more later on, is to get your views on what this means, what should these variants be, what parameters, what are the uncertainties we should be focusing on. So yeah, this is really a key part in our process. Afterwards, later this month, we'll proceed in 2 steps. So first, after discussing again in the SRG, we want to first decide on what are the key uncertainties and drivers to consider, and then decide on the parameters to build those variants. So we expect this to take place this month. And in September, I think it was mentioned already, but we aim at releasing a public document describing the scenario development methodology, which will be describing really how we intend to build these variants. So yeah, this is the timeline. Now on the agenda today to introduce the discussion and help you maybe understand a bit more so that you can provide informed input in the fishbowl discussion. We have asked ACER to introduce the topic by explaining their views on the variants. And then the SRG will provide a good basis for the discussion. So if Christy, if you are online, yes, I see you. I give you.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me again. Do you want to show my slide or should I pop up the shared screen?
Yes, please share the screen, Chrissy. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Now you should be able to see it. I go into presenter mode. Thank you very much again for having me this afternoon. I'd love to be there in person, but keeping the CO2 footprint low, I'll be presenting from Ljubljana. And the question here is, what is the mindset behind the 1 central scenario and 2 economic variants principle? Now, as we all know, in the last 5 years, there has been a lot of political development and a lot of new policies coming out, which affected our regulations and directives. Just to mention a few, we had the EU Green Deal, then the Fit for 55, the Repower EU, but also the national energy and climate plans published. Now, the aggregation of these national approaches that reach EU objectives, they set the target that you can now see on the slide as a golden arrow. There is only one golden arrow that points towards the 2030 and 2050 climate neutrality targets. However, over time, there's an increasing range of uncertainty. We cannot predict necessarily how the future looks like, as we don't have a crystal ball, but we can use economic variance, or the economy in general, to roughly get a feeling of how it could look like. So where we have years where there's a strong economic drive, or years where there's a low economic drive. There is a general relatability of these economic variants to the EU targets, which means that in the end, these variants are not a standalone product, but they always relate and run around the central scenario. Therefore, the variants are stress tests of the central scenario, and they offer additional information. But they, as I said already, should not be considered a standalone product. These economic variants, therefore, have bring some sensitivity so that we start looking a little bit to the left and to the right, what might happen, in order to be prepared for what happens in the future. Other variants could be discussed in future, but for now, we rely on the economic ones. Now, a few days ago, I went to my colleagues who have been working on this matter for quite a few years longer than me, and I have asked them what the main difference is between this one and the previous scenario developments. And one of my colleagues drew up a circle, basically, with it's 2 optimistic or very pessimistic scenarios that are all basically working against each other. These old contrasting scenarios, however, build a question that we always wanted to have answered, or that we want to have answered when building out the European infrastructure grid. And this is how to make sure that investment decisions can be based on as reliable situations as possible. So therefore, there has been a little bit of a shift, and this is the general mindset behind the one central scenario and two economic variance principle. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. Now, Andrzej, it's your turn to present the views of the SRG on the topic.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm Andrzej Ceglarz, and I have the honor to be the second co-convener of the stakeholder reference group. And just a small clarification, since what I'm going to present are not the views of the SRG about the economic variance, but I want to present the insights of the work that we have done so far to serve also as a basis for the discussion. And this is because within the SRG we have quite strict rules of voting, and this is still work in progress. So before the entire group agrees what are our views and what is our perception of this development, I will be presenting just of the insights and the way how we proceed. Yes. No. So just to give a background, it is already mentioned several times that the discussion about high and low economic variance was included in the ACER scenario guidelines. That's one of the decisions why this direction has been chosen. But a different article, or the following article of scenario guidelines also mentioned, and something what Christy said, that economic variance are not the end product of this journey, because there are also other uncertainties that have impact on scenario development that might be different than economic development, and this is also something that we are considering within the SRG. And which one I should? Yes. Well, yep. And the topic itself, it's not new for at least some of the SRG members, because it was also discussed during the public consultations on scenario guidelines, which took place in October and November 2022. And some of the SRG members already back then provided their input about an opinion about the discussion or incorporating economic variance into the scenario building. Next one. So a bit of the timeline, also showing how that this is a bit stressed in time. But so today we have the workshop, but the discussion about how to work within the SRG on this topic started already in April, when we moved from the recommendations for the 2024 scenarios to 2026. And at the beginning, we started with some literature review, but also consulting some macroeconomic modelers, because as the SRG, we also have a right to consult other experts if we find that the expertise covered by the group is not enough. In mid-May, that was kind of first, let's say, proper consultation of ENTSO-Es presenting about the different options, different possibilities, how the topic could be tackled within the scenarios. And through the following 2 months, we had some internal discussions and considerations, especially within the first working group. As Eva presented, we are divided into 4 different working groups, how to deal with it. Next one. And in June, the decision was taken by ENTSO-Es to go for the option as presented previously, to have one central scenario with 2 variants, high and low economic growth, which would be the stress test. And our next task was to discussion and collection of ideas, how shall we provide a valuable input into the direction how the economic variance should be included in the scenarios. Next one, please. Our starting point was looking how storylines were constructed in the previous scenario cycle, taking that there have been different categories of high-level drivers, which afterwards were broken down into, let's say, specific variables that would differentiate the scenarios. What we did, next one, that we created just very simple tables looking on the first one, what are the uncertainties and drivers of the energy transition and the infrastructure development. So let's say the first step, the higher level, so what drives the energy transition. And the second one, what are the uncertainties and drivers related to low and high economic growth? Because there is a difference between understanding of both. At the same time, what we did, what was mentioned in the previous session, that ENTSOs are also working, and this is included in NACEN scenario guidelines, about the innovation roadmap document. And we thought that this is kind of work that can and should be done in parallel, because we're thinking about the innovations. This is also something that can feed this, let's say, exercise of collecting drivers of the energy transition, and which of those drivers potentially could also be then included as the innovation in the next modeling cycle. What are the results of this exercise? There are many of them, and these are the snapshots of the input that we collected so far. There is a purpose. Why is it so small so you can't see it? It's just not to bias you before the discussion that we are going to have after this session, but this is rather to present that as SRG we have been working on the topic, and so far by today we collected 38 different uncertainties and drivers when it comes to the infrastructure development and the energy transition through entire spectrum of different, let's say, categories of this uncertainty. So social, economic, environmental, technological, political. Next to that, we collected 24 uncertainties of high and low economic growth, which could be relevant for infrastructure development, also providing some initial operationalization of the parameters that can be then used for the calculation within the modeling. And here the spectrum was a bit smaller, mostly taking upon the economic, political, social, and technological factors. And at the same time, in parallel, we collected, let's say, 20 different innovations relevant for the TYNDP process, that could be then potentially reflected within these parameters, but they also take into account, for instance, the process related to stakeholder engagement. So what are the next steps, what we are planning to do? So first, we need to analyze the collected input, and then following this, we will have discussion, as Lea presented, with ENTSOs, also to combine the input from this workshop, but also looking about the potential design and the format of the innovation roadmap document. We are also considering maybe again bringing some external experts on board to get their feedback, thinking mostly about the macroeconomic modelers. And then we are going to accompany, and I understood that also co-decide about the parameters that would differentiate the economic variance within the modeling. But still, even though the decision will be made, we want to continue the internal work on different uncertainties, on different drivers, to see how we could contribute also within the view of the 2028 cycle. And throughout this entire process, this will also contribute to build our internal position on the topic of economic variance. So what is to take away from this? So we decided within the SRG that we just don't want to do a simple selection of different parameters or whatever the drivers could be, not to reduce the information, but for us it's important to deliver a good quality information, which might happen, will not be fully implemented within the 2026 cycle, but can be used then for the 2028 cycle. And this collective effort should also underline the independence of the SRG, but also build internal knowledge that would allow to agree on the input that we would like to present as the group. What is challenging is aligning of the timelines within the scenario development process, because on the one hand there is this permanent time pressure, but at the same time as SRG we are following our rules of making the decision, and that's the challenge, to align everything quite timely. And what is the outlook? It's that there will be a quite busy summer months in the front of us. So I think that's it from my side. And I guess, is there time for any questions, or shall we just move to the discussion?
There is time. If someone has questions actually now, I think it makes sense to, if you have questions for your understanding, it makes sense to ask them before we start discussing. If not, then I will introduce the next step, which is the fishbowl discussion. And there is one slide on the fishbowl format. So for those among you who maybe are not familiar with this format, so you can see a circle of chairs here, where a few people are going to sit at the beginning. Anyone is free to join and sit on an empty chair at any time, make your statement. Please do not speak more than 2 minutes, just to leave more time for other people to speak. And when you're done, you can leave the chair and leave the space for someone else. Please introduce yourself before speaking, as usual. And we may still need the microphone, but there's not so many of us in the room, so let's see.
Okay, so we can proceed with the fishbowl. I wouldn't stop here the Teams meeting, because this is only supposed to be in person here in Brussels. I want to thank very much those who connected to the workshop online. All the video recording will be available online in our website. And also our colleagues are going to reply in written form to all the questions that have been raised during the workshop. Thank you again.